Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics like wealth creation strategies, investment principles, creating passive income, paying off your debt faster, and much, much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of 360 Money Matters. I am Billy, and I'm joined by
Andrew.
Andrew, good to see you.
Yeah, things are going well, despite the lockdowns in Melbourne, but we're getting through and seeing some light at the end of the tunnel.
That's it. Well, today we've got a fairly exciting episode coming to our listeners.
First of its kind.
That's absolutely right. We have got a special guest on our podcast today. First guest presenter that we've got, so we're pretty excited about what this looks like.
Yeah, really excited about it and talking about a really exciting topic. It's all things property, and so that's something that I think, especially here in Australia, most people are really interested in, and it's very topical at the moment with what's happening with the rapid rise in property prices post-lockdown.
Absolutely. Very timeliness in terms of our episode, and the topic that we're talking about today is about buyer's advocacy. So we'd like to introduce Natalie Greatrex from Greatrex Properties. She is a 14-year veteran in the real estate industry. She's been a buyer's advocate with her business. She founded that 7 years ago. Natalie, how are you going?
Hi, Billy and Andrew. Thanks for having me here today.
We're very excited to hear about what you do and how you help your clients, and looking forward to having a good, robust chat and bringing our listeners some value around the world of buyer's advocacy and how you can help them and what that looks like.
Yeah, definitely. And good to have someone else on board to be able to, give some other insights and give a bit more of a robust and in-depth discussion in an area that we think in financial planning is really important. It's really topical, and it's something that I personally think, people should be receiving advice on, and that's buyer's advocacy. So tell us, Natalie, what does a buyer's advocate do? What are the services that you offer? How does it work?
So a buyer's advocate is an independent real estate agent that works exclusively for the buyer. When someone sells a property, they will engage a real estate agent to help them sell, and that real estate agent works on the seller's behalf. So we represent the buyer through their property purchase and journey, whether that's owner-occupier or an investment. An experienced buyer's advocate will, help you find the right property at the right price, minimize your risk through due diligence, and negotiate that best price for the buyer.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. From our perspective, and I guess how that ties into what you were saying before, Andrew, with our clients and our preference, I guess, is when you're dealing with property, it's a pretty big purchase the majority of the time.
30-year commitment for most people.
Well, yeah, 30-year commitment. Pretty easy, in our opinion and our experience, I guess, to make a mistake. And it's one of those transactions that you don't enter into that frequently. Lucky if you do it a handful of times throughout your lifetime. It is easy to make a mistake. So from our perspective, when we're talking to clients, and if they're not experts in the property field, definitely see a huge opportunity to be able to engage with the buyer's advocate to get some advice around the purchase to make sure that they're making the right decision, and more importantly, avoiding the pitfalls of buying a property that's not going to perform or that's going to cause issues for them down the track.
Yeah, and the analogy that I sort of use with a lot of my clients is most of the time, whether you're going to purchase an asset, whatever asset it is, whether that's shares, whether that's a managed fund, whatever it is, you're more than likely going to receive some form of advice on it. Whereas a lot of people, when you're purchasing something that's of such a large scale, I don't even want to look at what the median property price is in Melbourne. You don't receive advice on it, and you just kind of jump in the dark and have a look at purchasing a property, because I don't know, I think everyone kind of feels like they've got an understanding of property because they can see and touch it, but engaging with an expert and making sure that you're making the right decision and an informed decision is, I think, imperative.
Well said, Andrew. Natalie, I guess from your perspective, when you are looking for properties to purchase for clients, I mean, what are some of the things that you're looking for when you're doing that work for a client?
It depends on the criteria and, early part of the process before we go out and source a property for a buyer, whether that's a home buyer or investor, again, would be getting very clear on the criteria and their short, medium and long-term goals to find a property that's aligned to their goals. Even I think with home buyers, you can easily, whilst, you've got to find something that suits your lifestyle and suitable for your family and various factors, it's easy to get lost and not find something that has compound, the ability to have capital growth still.
Which is really important because ultimately, if there's no capital growth, even if it's an owner-occupied property, it does impact your wealth creation because of your ability to leverage off it in the future, which is an interesting point. Do you find most of your clients are looking at owner-occupied properties suiting the lifestyle goal? Do you think that most of your clients are looking at investment properties whereby they're just looking at the best investment decision? How does that kind of split tend to work with you?
I personally deal with both. Owner-occupiers, their end goal is very different to investors. However, I do like to remind owner-occupiers that it is probably the biggest purchase they'll ever make, and to not lose focus of emotions and still make a educated purchase that will help deliver their longer term goals.
Yeah. I guess from our perspective, when we're talking to clients as well too, from a financial planning and an overall strategy perspective, I guess there's always that differentiation between not necessarily a lifestyle asset, but if you are dealing with an owner-occupier, it looks like one thing. And if you are doing work with an investor, it does look like something else as well too. And I guess from our perspective, and Natalie, I'm sure it's the same with you, but when you are looking at it, you always want to make sure that the fundamentals of the property purchase are still sound, even if it is an owner-occupier or even if it is an investment property, because regardless of which way you're going, you always need that property to perform. It always needs to tick a few certain boxes from a wealth creation perspective as well too. So keeping an eye on that and not losing sight of that, I think, is crucial when we're definitely talking to clients anyway. So,
yeah, which touches the point and sort of would love your insights on it, Natalie. What is it that you're looking for when you're looking at property? And probably more so, I guess, from a lifestyle perspective, an owner-occupied property is just sort of matching the lifestyle goals of the client. But in particular, when you're looking at an investment property, I mean, we've all kind of heard the saying, you buy the worst property on the best street. How much truth is there to that? What are some of the factors that you're taking into consideration when you're making a decision on behalf of a client?
Location's always, critical when looking at an investment, and then the asset type itself, whether that's an apartment, a villa unit, a townhouse, something with land component. It's always budget relative as well. So it's working within the client's means and finding the best opportunity for them within their budget. You getting the right property obviously allows them to continue to invest throughout their lifetime. I think a lot of investors tend to get carried away and want to build a portfolio of 10 properties. You've got to have patience and let property do its thing and perform over time. And, they might not need 10 properties to reach the end goal. 2 or 3 good investments could also, with the right amount of patience and buying the right property, get them to the same end point instead of 5 properties that aren't going to deliver in the same way if they did it on their own.
Sometimes you can get too caught up in just the number of properties and the ego that's associated with that as opposed to the actual value that's derived from each one.
Yeah, there's the nuggets in goal. Getting your name on the title is not the name of the game. It's getting your name on the title of good quality properties that are going to perform over the longer term. And I think you hit the nail on the head there, Natalie, and this is definitely a philosophy that we talk about with financial planning all the time, is that you need to be patient and you need to let your investments do their thing as well too. Property is always a good one in our perspective and in our experience, because by its very nature, in terms of the costs associated with transacting with property, because it is so expensive, because the barriers to entry are high, people don't transact on property the same way that they do with other assets. So we find that also works to the advantage of that asset class, because it keeps people invested in it for longer, like they should be doing anyway. So yeah, really well said.
Yeah, and look, just touching on that, I think also, people who go out and do invest or buy on their own, they don't realise 10 years down the track that the property they have purchased wasn't the right property as well. So by engaging with an advocate and getting that advice, you've got minimising your risk from day one.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's fair to say, and from our experience, and I guess from your point of view, are you finding that there's a greater awareness around what buyers advocates do?
It's definitely become a lot more popular. I'm seeing more and more advocates pop up, which is great. People are more educated when hearing that terminology. I think the importance is to make sure that you've got an experienced advocate that's got the right knowledge to help you find what you're looking for. I guess some advocates, purely focus on home buyers, whereas others have that experience to work with investors as well.
And do most advocates, I'm not sure with yourself, but do most advocates stick to a particular area, whether it's the southeastern suburbs in Melbourne, whether it's western suburbs or particular types of properties, or is it sort of a bit more generalised?
It varies, to be honest. I think a lot of the advocates focusing on home buyers tend to have a preferred area or one or two areas that they specialise in or have more knowledge in. Other advocates that probably have more experience with investors as well will be a bit more flexible in the areas they'll go to. Their approach and strategies very different, and it's much more research driven and fact driven. So they have that flexibility to broaden the areas they work in.
And what about, we're hearing a lot about, especially during COVID in, I guess, Victoria in particular, where the markets have been closed or inspections have been closed, I should say, for quite some time, and talking about sort of on-market opportunities versus off-market opportunities. And from a buyer's advocacy perspective, thinking through that, relationships with real estate agents, being presented with opportunities that haven't hit the market yet. What does that look like with you and your business and your relationship with estate agents?
Yeah, having good relationships with estate agents is, a critical part of our day-to-day work. We get I get calls all the time with off-market opportunities from agents, and I guess agents like working with an advocate as well in that scenario, because a lot of time we have a qualified pre-approved on the finance end buyer, which, when they deal with us, they know that we're not wasting their time. But an off-market is not always a good purchase either. So sometimes, a vendor might be willing to sell a property only for a premium price. So therefore, an agent will throw it out there as an off-market and just test the water and also educate the vendor in that process. So I wouldn't say every off-market's the way to go, but there's definitely, it does broaden your opportunity as a buyer, and having access to buyers advocates network of agents to get, told about properties prior or off market.
Yeah, so just creates more opportunities.
Yeah.
So you're not just looking at the realestate.com.au properties and the domain properties, but rather a broader range of properties.
Broader range, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there you go. And also, look, I guess from our perspective, we're numbers people, right? So we always think about the future, wealth creation, growth, the compounding effect. In terms of value, and we might try and put some numbers around this as well too, but in terms of value, if I was a client thinking about engaging with your services as a buyer's advocacy provider, would I be thinking of in terms of cost? What could I kind of be expecting in terms of if I engage with you in your business? What are some of the numbers? What does some of that look like from your perspective?
I think you got to look at compound growth of the property. Obviously, engaging an advocate does come at a cost to a purchaser. But if you look at that over a long-term period, let's say 10 years, and the difference of even getting 1% or 2.5% growth by using an advocate, you're obviously going to end up in a much better position, you'd hope anyway. If we just say you purchased at $650, for example, and the benefit of the advice from the advocate over a 5-year period, you'd be with a 2.5% growth difference, you'd be almost $100,000 ahead.
Yeah, really significant, isn't it? Yeah.
And put that to compound interest again, put that to forward 10 years, you're looking 250 plus.
Which is a massive discrepancy in terms of wealth creation. And you're talking about one property. I dare say that the vast majority of people that are, and this isn't everyone, but if you're engaging with a financial advisor or a buyer's advocate, if you're making active steps towards growing your wealth, that compound's not just going to be across one property. Very likely that's going to be across 2, 3, 4 properties, as well as other investments outside of that. So once you kind of add all of that together, it kind of makes the cost of a buyer's advocate seem fairly minimal.
Look, even within a year, you can almost get that growth on the property and cover the costs of engaging an advocate.
Yeah, look, 100%. Some of those numbers that you've thrown out, the numbers speak for themselves. And engaging with a professional and getting an outperformance is something that you'd expect. But there's some other stuff associated with that as well too, like just the thinking about the peace of mind that you get, and thinking back to my own property journey and the amount of times that I've purchased property, how emotionally driven it is. Even if it is an investment, it's still stressful.
Oh, massively. Even
Stressful, time consuming.
All of those things. So paying a fee just to help get some help throughout that process is well worth it, in my opinion. And then you go and add some of those numbers. And you were talking about a reasonably short period of time. From our perspective with financial planning, we're always talking longer term investments, and a property would definitely fall into that category. You go and expand that time horizon further out, the numbers are absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, holding onto a property 20, 25 years. I mean, it's a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, and this is only looking at the capital growth as well. I think that if you're making any decision, whether it's an investment or whether it's a lifestyle choice, you're also taking into consideration, you're engaging with a financial advisor to determine, is this the right type of asset class? You're also engaging with a mortgage broker to find out what's the best deal that I can get on a loan. You're also wanting to look at, okay, what's the expected rental income from the property? So what's the yield? How much am I going to be out of pocket from a cash flow situation? So the more professionals that you have that are specialized in that field, the more areas that you're looking at as well. And you're
having the right team around you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, yields, obviously the other component is always that balancing act of finding a property that has the growth opportunity and also understanding the yield and your cash flow with an investment as well. But even as, an owner-occupier, I always, with clients, will look at it from a rental perspective as well, just in the instance that they do have a change in circumstances and everything, that they have an understanding about the property they're buying to from that angle. And if they did need to rent it out or anything, that they can make sure it still works for them with a change of scenario.
So even if it's a lifestyle choice, you still want to overlay the investment.
I always will with a client, just to take that emotion away from it and look at the asset for itself. I think that's really, really important, regardless of any type of property you buy.
Yeah. And what demographic of people tend to not only use, but should use a buyer's advocate? Is it usually, first home buyers that are inexperienced, or people that are, downsizing and starting to reach retirement, or is it sort of anywhere in between?
I've worked with first home buyers to savvy investors and people purchasing their third or fourth family home. So it really varies, and the purchase price varies as well. I've had clients buying at $450,000. I think realistically, from a cost angle, it probably starts to make more sense with people buying upwards of $550 to $600. But again, I suppose it's just understanding the value in an advocate, and if it makes sense to a buyer, then I think it's something everyone should be doing.
Yeah, going back to those numbers, you're right. I think it obviously just the growth aspect of it. I mean, obviously getting an outperformance on a high value property is going to have a more absolute return down the track. But thinking about those other intangibles that we were talking about, the peace of mind, the hand-holding, the education piece, all of that, that's relevant and applicable regardless of what property price you go in at. So definitely see the value right across the board from that perspective, yeah.
Yeah, and, another point we probably haven't touched much on is negotiation as well. It's not something that, buyers regularly. So at that point is very critical in the purchase process, and understanding, agents' jargon as such, and how to, put your best foot forward and have a strategy around purchasing, whether it's an auction or a private sale or off-market, purchase.
Yeah. So just drilling down a little bit more on that, can we just maybe talk about the different approach that you take when you are dealing with a real estate agent for maybe an auction versus a private sale, and what your approach is based on the two different selling techniques?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I suppose some different strategies are with a private sale. In this market in particular, it's likely there's still going to be multiple offers and multiple buyers you're up against. Some agents will be running best and final scenario. So that means you've only got one shot to secure the property, and you don't get much visibility to any other offers. So you're in a position where you can either miss out by a very small amount or overpay for a property as well. So asking the right questions to the agent and gauging their feedback. And that's where I feel having relationships with agents is really important, because then you can understand their negotiation and communication style and sale process.
Yep.
And that obviously then in turn helps our buyers as well. So I can best advise in the process to put forward with purchasing. I suppose with an auction, you can always try and purchase before it does go to an actual auction campaign. And again, that will come down to interest and vendor motivation, and whether the agent feels that the price you might put forward's going to be better or equal to what they'd actually get by running the auction campaign itself or the auction on the day. Auction, you can, the different approaches you see people pop up at the end, or you can go in aggressive and try and show strength that you're not going to give in. I've seen other strategies where the purchaser and the advocate will be on other sides of the room and both bidding and looking like independent parties. I mean, so there's a few different approaches you can always take with that as well.
Yeah, I've always found that interesting. I mean, I've heard all of the stories as well too, and physically where you're standing and having a physical presence and eyeballing your competition.
Yeah, look.
I mean, I don't know if any of that stuff makes a difference. It's definitely entertaining.
I've always got my preference where you want to stand, and I always like to be able to see, make sure I'm positioned to see the crowd and other bidders as well.
Stare them down.
I always thought maybe
friendly stare.
Being more committed than having pockets, I think, and being prepared to go the furthest. But, I don't know, maybe there is some method to some of these stories and stuff that you hear, but it's definitely entertaining nonetheless.
Which is an interesting point. I mean, have you ever or do you sort of split out any of your services? So if someone says, I'm equipped in relation to, looking at a property and examining a property, but I'm not comfortable with negotiating, or do you have sort of a split model, or is it just...
Yeah, good question. Look, some buyers will come and want the full service from start to finish. Obviously, will involve the criteria and sourcing, due diligence and everything, which we touched on before. But then I do have clients that will just approach for auction bidding only or the negotiation side only. Sometimes even clients will want to do the research and search themselves, but then come for just due diligence and negotiation. So a little bit more advice on the property they're buying at that end point before they do entertain putting an offer in.
Yeah. So it sounds like either a full service offering, or you can tailor it based on the different elements of the purchase.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of flexibility in that. Absolutely. Natalie, how can our listeners get in contact with you if they want to know more? Website, greatrexproperty.com.au?
Yeah, Greatrex Property, and that's more property management, but we've also the Greatrex Property Advisory.com.au.
Yep. So both of those two, really easy way to get in contact with Natalie and her team. If any of our listeners are interested in any of her services, or like usual, you can reach out to the 360 team at our website and get in contact with us there, and we can pass across Natalie's details if any of our listeners are interested in that. Andrew, great episode. Our first guest presenter. Natalie, what a great experience. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, really good to have you in on the podcast, and really good to have another presence. I was starting to get a little bit tired of this.
As you would. No, thanks for the chat today, guys. It's been great.
Great. Thank you, guys. And thank you to our listeners. Once again, really enjoyed putting this podcast together, and hopefully we created a fair bit of value on something a little bit different than what we haven't spoken about before in the past. So thank you to our listeners for listening, taking the time and listening to our podcast.
Appreciate it very much, and look forward to catching you in the next one.
Thank you. Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about, or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
Just a reminder to our listeners that the information contained in this podcast is general in nature, and it is not intended as personal recommendations for the audience. Please consider whether the information suits your circumstances before acting on it. This information is provided by Billy Amiridis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Pty Ltd, authorised representatives and credit representatives of AMP Financial Planning.